Welcome back. In the first video, we talked through how the core knowledge middle school math curriculum works. And now in this video, we're going to be talking through the various materials you'll be downloading and using to teach your student. Okay, if you haven't watched that first video yet, please go back and do so, and then come back and join me here. All right, with this free math curriculum from Core Knowledge, one thing that always worries me is that there's quite a lot of files in the folder you're going to download from Core Knowledge, and that can be really overwhelming. When I first downloaded everything to start working on this so I could put together all of the resources and videos, I was overwhelmed. So the good news, though, as a homeschooler is you don't actually need to use every file, and you won't need to print every file, and I've already worked all of that out for you. So hang with me here. I'm going to show you. Okay. So let's go ahead and just jump back in. I'm going to show you the different materials, and we'll get really specific on what you will and won't need to use and what you'll need to print and that sort of thing. All right, first things first. The Core Knowledge Middle School Math Curriculum can be downloaded for free from the Core Knowledge Foundation's website. And each grade level consists of a set of units, and each unit will include a teacher's guide, a student book, and then a bunch of teacher resources in a folder. If you visit my website or my YouTube channel, I have a short how-to video that will walk you through step-by-step how to download curriculum files from Core Knowledge. Now, all those files will be in PDF format, so you will be able to view them on a tablet or laptop, or you can print them. Okay, so let's start talking through these resources, including which ones you're going to need and not need. All right, so first up is the teacher's guide. Every unit is going to include a teacher's guide, and this is the most important piece of the curriculum because it contains all of the teaching information. It also has all the answers to the practice problems, that sort of thing. These teacher's guides are big files. They are hundreds of pages for each unit because they include an explicit teaching script for every lesson and very detailed explanations for answers to practice problems. Now, these teacher's guides are really well put together, and they make it possible to teach this curriculum even if math isn't personally your strongest subject. Now, as I mentioned in the first video, this curriculum does need to be actively taught. This isn't the sort of curriculum you're just going to be able to hand your student and then correct their work later. You're going to be spending about a half hour each school day sitting next to your student and working through the step-by-step instructions in the teacher's guide to present the lesson. Now, because the teacher's guide is a big resource with several important parts, I'm going to do a detailed tour of it in video number 3. We'll walk through each section, and I'll help you learn how to use this resource efficiently, because the goal in the end is that you can confidently use this to homeschool every day. All right, and then in video number 4, we'll sit down together and we'll do a detailed tour of an example lesson. I'm really hoping it'll be like I came to your house and showed you how to do this. Okay, so I'm just trying here to get this information broken up so no one gets overwhelmed. That's why there's 4 videos. But I promise once you get the hang of using these different resources, the rhythm of the lesson each school day, this curriculum is not difficult to use. It just can seem like a lot of info up front. So, hang in there here. All right, so we have the teacher's guide. Next up, this is the student book. This is the book of worksheets. It's a better way to think of it. Now, again, there's going to be one of these student workbooks for each unit you download, and it does need to be printed. Okay, so as you can see with the example pages here, most of the pages in the student book are black and white. There are some, though, some of those pages are in color, and sometimes, unfortunately, the color does matter. I think that example page I have there that's in color is from the percentages unit, and the student is supposed to start the lesson by attempting to estimate the percentage of each color represented in the figure. Okay, so here's the thing. It's clearly much less costly to print a black and white workbook, right? And if that's the option you have with your home printer, like I have a really awesome workhorse black and white printer at home, so I try to print everything in black and white that I possibly can. If that's where you're at, or your budget to pay somebody to print them is only for black and white, that's okay. If you get to a page where you do need to see the color, you can always pull up the workbook file, because it's just a PDF file, on a tablet or laptop during that lesson and just look at the color version of the page needed for the lesson. Please don't let these occasional color images stop you from printing in black and white if that's what works best for your family. Now, if you do happen to have an economical color printing option, I have some of you out there have those subscription services and just print all the things, then I would recommend printing the workbook file in color. So if it works for you and your budget to print in color, great. All right, once you've printed each unit workbook, you can take them to your local office supply store to have them spiral bound. Okay, that generally is like, I don't know, $4 or $5 each, or cheaper option is to 3-hole punch the pages and just store them in a binder. Either way works fine. Okay, before we move on, the answers to the problems in the student book are in the teacher's guide, and they are actually in each lesson of the teacher's guide. So if you're looking for the answers from the worksheets for lesson 3, they will be in the lesson 3 instructions in the teacher's guide. They're not going to be in some separate file or in the back or something like that. Okay, quick side note. Obviously, I'm starting to tell you like what you're going to print and whether you need to do black and white or color. So don't stress too much, though, about taking detailed, frantic notes during this video. If you go to my website, homeschoolworkplans.com, you can download the organization guide and the unit prep checklist for the math curriculum. All this info I'm giving you right now, that is right there in written form. Everything on my website is free to download. When it comes time to sit down and prep for the school year, those documents are going to make it a really straightforward process for you. All right, next step. Every unit you download from Core Knowledge is going to have a subfolder marked Teacher Resources. Now, this folder contains a lot of files, an overwhelming amount of files. Okay, so I realize the teacher's guide, the student book, those explanations we just did, those are pretty easy. You could probably figure that out on your own. But these teacher resources are confusing, and in the end, you're only going to need a few of them as a homeschooler. So let's just look at each one so you'll be clear on what they are and which ones you need and which ones you don't need. All right, first the cool downs. All right, here's the deal. Every lesson has an introductory portion, a primary teaching portion, a portion where they're practicing with you the skills, kind of a secondary teaching portion, and then they have a cool down. That's how you finish up the lesson before they do their practice problems. Okay. Now, when we walk through an example lesson in video number 4, you're going to see that this is actually very straightforward. But the worksheet for the cool down portion, for some reason, is in a separate file in the Teacher's Resources subfolder. And I'm going to be honest, the fact that it's in a separate file, I find to be very annoying. I have to remind myself that this program was this program was designed to be used in a classroom. So it is probably makes more sense for a teacher to like pass these out at the end of a lesson. But that is not our world, right? So here's my recommendation to make your life as a homeschooling parent easier. You're going to print this file, and then you're going to put it in the binder with the student workbook. Okay. Now, if you want, you could slot the pages in. So you could say cool down page, for lesson 1 goes with the lesson 1 worksheets. Or you could just throw all the cool down pages in the back of the binder. It really doesn't matter. They're just functionally part of the student workbook. So let's just put them there and make our lives easier. All right, next we have the assessment files. You'll need to print these, and I would recommend keeping them again in the same binder with the student worksheets, or if you'd prefer, you could put them in a separate folder. Just have them handy one way or another. There is also a separate file for the answers to the assessments, and it's clearly marked though. It's easy to find, but you don't need to print the answers. All right, I'll talk more thoroughly about the assessments in video number 3, but the short version is that there is an assessment at the beginning and end of each unit and occasionally in the middle of the unit. They typically occur over 2 days, so there are 4 or 6 of these assessment days per unit. And I do realize that many homeschoolers are not interested in formally assessing their students. Okay, there's a lot of reasons for that, and that's fine, but please don't skip these, please. Yeah, their main purpose on paper is to double check that your student is retaining the concepts, but they also serve as really important pausing points for practice. Now, as I mentioned in the first video, this curriculum has less built-in daily practice than a lot of other math curriculums. And so these assessment days really serve, again, as that pausing point to practice and reinforce what is learned. So if you skip them, you're really skipping important practice. And I just really encourage you not to do that for your students' sake. So don't let that word assessment throw you off. These really aren't optional assessments. You'll definitely need to print these sheets, and you don't need to worry about when to do them. They're scheduled on the daily schedule you can download for free from my website. If you decide not to use my schedule, all good. In the assessment files, at the beginning of the file, it says, in theory, when you're supposed to use them. All right, next up in that teacher resources folder is the Black Line Masters. Funny name. Okay, this is another one you'll be using. and these are figures your student will be cutting out and working with to help reinforce concepts. Now, in the teacher's guide, it's very clear in the lesson when you'll need to use one and which one to use. So you don't need to worry. It's really not going to be confusing. I've also put some notes about these in the unit-specific checklist you can download from my website, so you can easily see in advance, when you'll be using these. Now, there's again one of these files for every unit, and the first page of the file, let's see if I can get this up here. Yay, that worked. Okay. The first page of the file gives detailed information. So it's like this little spreadsheet. It says how many of each of these blackline masters to print per student, as well as when it can be helpful to print on cardstock versus regular printer paper. If you don't have cardstock, that's fine. But if you do, it can be helpful. Some of these figures and stuff are a little bit more fun if the paper's a little stiffer. Okay, this example you see here is from the first unit for 6th grade, and that chart lists all that information up front. So you begin a unit, you have this lovely chart telling you exactly what and how to print these. All right, so now we get to the resources you probably won't need to use as a homeschooler. But everybody has a little bit of a different circumstance, so let's go through these quickly so you'll know what they are in case you feel they would be helpful to you. All right, first, the printable lesson plans are the exact same lesson plans that are in the teacher's guide, but they have a little bit bigger font, and they're broken out so you could print one lesson at a time. So I think the best idea of how these would be used is if you're the type of person who works best by printing out the pages and kind of laying them out on the table in front of you so you could just kind of glance at things as you're giving a lesson. I would print out this version because the font's a little bit bigger. You can print one lesson at a time. They're easier to use than the teacher's guide, if that's what you're doing, if you're laying things out. Next, the family support materials are designed to be sent home with students to help the adults understand what the student is learning so that the adults can help with the homework. Now, you probably don't need these, but if you're in a situation where someone else might be helping your student with their worksheet later in the day, maybe an older sibling or another adult, this file could be useful to them. The one thing I'll just bring up, though, is that this is actually a remarkably useful document in each unit. If you yourself are struggling a bit with some of these math concepts, this family support document even includes things like links to YouTube videos to help you get up to speed on the different concepts. It's actually really cool. The unit learning targets is another file that's in those teacher resources folder, and that teacher resources folder, it's a duplicate of what's in each unit's teacher's guide. And while the info is important, you do not need this file because you already have the information on the teacher's guide. And in the next video, when we go through the teacher's guide in great detail, I'll show you that information and why it's useful. All right, and then finally, in that teacher resources folder are these teacher presentation materials. So strangely, in some cases, there appear to be 2 copies of this file in different locations when you download the folders from Core Knowledge. You can likely ignore both, though. These are just isolated and visually larger graphics, so a teacher could display them to the whole class. So if you're standing up in front of a room of students, it's really nice to put, the shape up in, a big picture of the shape up in the front of the room to talk about it. Okay, I've gone through these. They appear to be always be duplicates of what's in the teacher's guide or the student worksheet. So you won't likely need to access these. You'll just be looking at your teacher's guide. Your student will be looking at their worksheet. You don't need to put up anything on the wall. All right, so that's it for a high-level tour of the resource. So here's the summary. The teacher's guide, very important, but you probably don't need to print it. You can easily access that PDF file on a device, such as a laptop or a tablet. The student book, the cool downs, the assessments, and the blackline masters, though, will need to be printed and ideally kept organized and nearby. And then you probably won't need those other materials, but they are there if you can find a use for them. All right, and then finally, just a plug that I've put all this info into written form, as well as dug through all the units and figured out what supplies you'll need and when you'll need them. I've even put together a daily schedule for the whole school year, and you are welcome to download all of that for free from my blog. My goal is to take the prep work, expense, and stress out of using this excellent and free curriculum to homeschool. This is my community service project, so please take advantage of all this work I've done. All right, so that's it for this video. Next up in video number 3, I'm going to walk you through the teacher's guide. We will look carefully at each section so you are familiar with what information you'll need to review to teach a lesson and what can be skipped. We'll also take a look at those assessment sheets I mentioned earlier and talk about more about how they're used. But that's it for now. I'll see you in a few minutes in video number 3.